I'm Daniel Harper, 45 years old, a photographer living in Portland, Oregon. I've spent my life capturing the beauty of nature, dense forests and Forest Park, snow-capped peaks of the Cascades, through my camera lens. My photos appear in magazines like National Geographic, and I recently completed a documentary about the environment. My small studio in the Pearl District, with its walls covered in photos, is a testament to what I've built from scratch. But to my wife's family, especially my mother-in-law, Margaret Thornton, it's all just a photography hobby. She often calls me a freelance artist, with a mocking smile, as if I'm a man with no future. I've been married to Claire, 42, for 15 years. Claire is an environmental biologist, with bright eyes and a passion for protecting nature that made me fall for her the first time we met at an art exhibition in the Pearl District. We live happily, though not as wealthy as her parents would like. But every time I step into the Thornton mansion in West Hills, I feel like an outsider, judged by standards I never wanted to meet. Margaret is always busy boasting about the family, while Richard, my father-in-law, a real estate tycoon, measures a man's worth by money and power. He often asks about my income with a tone that suggests I'm living off his daughter. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the latest video. Margaret's birthday party was an event I wanted to avoid. I just returned from a shoot in the Cascades, my body exhausted, my hands still rough from the cold. Claire convinced me to go, saying it'd just be a few hours to make her mom happy. I agreed, though I had a bad feeling. The Thornton mansion loomed before us, its colonial-style facade glowing under the lights. Inside, the dining room was lavish, with a glossy mahogany table, pristine white tablecloths, and crystal glasses sparkling under the chandelier. I sat there, holding a beer, my rough hands feeling out of place among the delicate finery. Claire squeezed my hand under the table, a silent apology for her parents' behavior. Her smile was strained, as if she too sensed the tension in the air. Margaret, in an expensive silk dress, busied herself arranging the table, her diamond earrings glinting with every tilt of her head. Richard sat at the head, sipping bourbon, eyes glued to his phone, barely noticing me. Nathan, Claire's brother, and his wife, Emily, chatted politely with other guests. I took a sip of my beer, mentally counting down the time until I could leave. After the main course, Margaret stood, her voice sweet as honey. "I've made a special sangria for dessert." She smiled, her gaze sweeping over everyone, then headed to the kitchen. Out of habit to help, I stood and followed her to carry the glasses. That was the moment everything changed. In the spacious kitchen, overhead lights gleamed off stainless steel surfaces. Margaret stood at the counter, her back to me, holding two glasses separate from the others. I stopped, my heart racing as I saw her tilt a small vial, pouring a colorless, odorless liquid into one glass of sangria. Her movements were quick, discreet, as if she'd done this before. Hearing my footsteps, she quickly hid the vial in her pocket, turning with a radiant smile. "Oh, Daniel, I've got this," she said, her voice unnaturally high, as if hiding something. "This one's for you, a special recipe for my favorite son-in-law." My throat went dry. Something was wrong. The glass in her hand shimmered under the light, a faint, filmy sheen on the surface, nearly invisible, unless you looked closely. I smiled, pretending to be casual. "Let me help carry these." I took both glasses, my fingers brushing her icy hand. I walked back to the dining room, my mind racing. Richard was still glued to his phone, not bothering to look up. "Sangria, sir?" I asked, my voice steady, placing the tampered glass in front of him instead of keeping it. I made an excuse about wanting water with dessert, my heart pounding, as Richard took a long sip from the glass. 45 minutes later, the dining room erupted in chaos. Richard suddenly paled, sweat beading on his forehead, clutching his stomach. He staggered to his feet, rushing to the bathroom. The sounds of violent retching echoed down the hall, sending everyone into a panic. Claire ran after her father, calling out in worry, "Dad, what's wrong?" Nathan and Emily whispered to each other, trying to make sense of it. Margaret sat still, her face ashen, her hands gripping her napkin tightly. When our eyes met, I saw panic in hers, quickly masked by a forced smile. I pretended to eat a bite of chocolate cake, but inside, a cold anger surged. In that moment, I knew two things for certain. My mother-in-law had tried to drug me, and she knew I'd figured it out. I said nothing, just watched quietly, but in my mind, I'd made up my mind. I wouldn't let this slide into silence. The cold anger still simmered in me as we left the Thornton mansion. Claire drove, her hands gripping the wheel tightly, her gaze distant. She was still worried about her dad, thinking it was just food poisoning, but I couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. The wine glass I'd discreetly taken was in my coat pocket, its faint filmy sheen a warning. I knew I needed answers, and I needed someone I could trust to find the truth. The next morning, I went to see Jason Miller, my college friend, now a lab technician at a facility in downtown Portland. His lab was filled with modern equipment, a faint chemical smell in the air. I set the glass on the table, recounting what happened, Margaret's furtive glance, the colorless liquid, and her calling it a special recipe. Jason frowned, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Daniel, are you sure? I mean your mother-in-law?" He trailed off, as if reluctant to believe a woman like Margaret could do such a thing. "All right. I'll test it. But if something's off, what's your plan?" "I need the truth," I said firmly. "Then I'll figure out what's next." While waiting for results, I returned to my studio in the Pearl District. The photos on the walls, misty forests, snow-capped peaks, usually calmed me, but today they only reminded me of Margaret's panicked eyes. I started recalling the past years, the signs I'd overlooked. Margaret always found ways to belittle me in front of Claire, calling me a freelance artist, like it was an insult. Once, at a Christmas party, she accidentally left me out of the family photo, saying the camera didn't have enough space. Richard was worse. He once pulled me aside, when Claire and I were talking about having another kid, and said, "Kids are expensive, Daniel. Maybe you should think about a real job first." I'd smiled, shaken his hand firmly, but inside, I wanted to punch him. I tried to keep these things from Claire. She loved her parents, despite their flaws, and I didn't want to force her to choose sides. But that glass of wine yesterday changed everything. It wasn't a random act, it was a plan, and I needed to know why. 3 days later, Jason called. "Daniel, you need to come here now," his voice serious. When I arrived at the lab, he handed me a report. "There's benzodiazepines in the wine. Not enough to kill, but enough to make someone disoriented, maybe cause temporary memory loss, or look unreliable. Where'd you get this glass?" I didn't answer, just thanked him, and took a copy of the report. Driving back, I circled through Forest Park, trying to process it. Benzodiazepines, a sedative. Margaret didn't just want me sick. She wanted me to seem like a failure, maybe in front of Claire or the other guests. But why? To prove I wasn't good enough for her daughter. To make Claire doubt me. That night, I decided to tell Claire. We sat in the living room after Ava and Ethan were asleep. The warm yellow lamplight couldn't dispel the tense atmosphere. I told her everything. How I saw Margaret pour something into the glass. How I swapped it with Richard's. And the lab results. Claire listened, her eyes wide. But then she shook her head. "Daniel, you're wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "Mom wouldn't do that. Maybe she mixed something up. Or, it was just some kind of syrup. She was stressed about the party. You know that." "Claire, it was benzodiazepines," I insisted, trying to stay calm. "Not syrup. Your mom did it on purpose." She stood, crossing her arms. "You're saying my mom tried to poison you?" "Daniel, she's my mom. She wouldn't do that." She paused, her eyes tearing up. "I'm sorry if she made you feel uncomfortable, but don't turn this into a conspiracy." I looked at her, feeling betrayed. Claire was the person I loved most, but right now she was choosing her mom's side, even if instinctively. I didn't argue further, just nodded, and said, "Okay, maybe I'm wrong." But inside, I knew I wasn't, and I knew I couldn't stop. That night, in my studio, I sat alone, staring at a photo of Claire and the kids at Forest Park from last year. Her smile in the picture made my heart ache. I didn't want to lose her, but I couldn't let Margaret keep playing her game. The signs I'd ignored were now clear. How Margaret asked Claire about our finances, how she forgot to invite me to family events, how Richard looked at me like I was his daughter's mistake. The wine wasn't the start, it was the tipping point. I held Jason's report, rereading every line. Benzodiazepines, a calculated plan. I didn't know what Margaret wanted, but I'd find out, not out of anger, but for Claire, for Ava, for Ethan, and for myself. I wouldn't let the Thorntons keep treating me like a passerby in their daughter's life. The days after the argument with Claire, the atmosphere in our home was heavy, like the fog in Forest Park. Claire still talked to me, but her voice was cold, as if I'd insulted something sacred by doubting her mom. Ava and Ethan sensed the tension, though they were young. Ava asked why Mom wasn't smiling as much, and I could only hug her, promising things would be okay. But inside, I knew I had to act. Jason's report about the benzodiazepines wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I needed to understand why Margaret did it, and if this was the first time she'd crossed that line. I started with the small details. One morning, in my studio in the Pearl District, I sat at my computer, researching benzodiazepines. The drug wasn't easy to get without a prescription, and I recalled Claire mentioning her mom took sedatives for anxiety. I contacted a friend who worked at a pharmacy in downtown Portland, asking him to check Margaret Thornton's records. I didn't expect much, but his response stunned me. Margaret had prescriptions for benzodiazepines from 3 different doctors, each prescribing higher than normal doses. She wasn't just using the drug, she was stockpiling it. A woman with a West Hills mansion, diamond earrings, and a flawless social reputation, hoarding sedatives like this, that wasn't normal. I began noticing other signs I'd overlooked. The times Margaret asked Claire about our finances, as if Claire needed her help. The times she forgot to invite me to family gatherings, only to call later with a syrupy apology. Once at a Christmas party, I overheard Margaret on the phone. Claire should have married someone like James, a doctor from a prestigious family, but she chose this artist guy. She paused, her voice dripping with contempt, when she said artist, as if it were a curse. Richard was more blunt. When we announced we wanted another child, he pulled me aside and said, "Kids are expensive, Daniel. Are you sure you can afford it?" I smiled, shook his hand firmly, but inside, I just wanted to yell. Those memories now stood out clearly, like photos developing in a dark room, but I needed more. I needed proof. I remembered Claire mentioning an ex-fiancé, Stephen Carter from college. She'd only spoken of him briefly, saying they broke up because they weren't right, but her eyes always held a hint of regret when she told the story. I tracked Stephen down through a mutual friend, a professor at the University of Portland. After a few messages, he agreed to meet me at a small cafe near the Willamette River. Stephen, now a software engineer, still carried the calm demeanor of someone who once loved Claire deeply. When I told him about the wine glass and Jason's report, he frowned, then sighed. "I'm not surprised," he said, his voice low. "Margaret and Richard sabotaged my relationship with Claire. They said I wasn't trustworthy, that I was cheating. They even sent Claire fake texts, as if from some other woman. Claire didn't believe me when I tried to explain. Eventually, she broke up with me, and I heard she went back to live with him for a while. He sent me a series of old emails between him and Claire, painful lines about doubt and heartbreak. One email from Margaret, pretending to comfort Claire, gave me chills. "You deserve better, sweetheart. Mom and Dad will always be here." It wasn't comfort, it was manipulation. Stephen looked at me, his eyes full of warning. "They won't stop, Daniel. They want to control Claire, and anyone who gets in their way is an enemy." Stephen's words were like the final piece of a puzzle. I realized Margaret and Richard weren't just targeting me. They had a pattern. They'd pushed Stephen out of Claire's life, and probably others too. Anyone who encouraged her to live independently, to pursue her passions, was removed. I thought time would make them accept me, but I was wrong. They didn't want me as a son-in-law. They wanted me gone, like Stephen. Meanwhile, Margaret started pulling Claire in harder. She called daily, inviting Claire to the mansion for mother-daughter talks. Claire grew distant, inviting Claire to the mansion for mother-daughter talks. Claire grew distant, often silent at home. Once I saw her holding her phone, eyes red after a call with her mom. When I asked, she just said, "Mom's worried about me." I wanted to tell her about Stephen, about the prescriptions, but I held back. Prescriptions, but I held back. Claire wasn't ready, and I didn't want to tell her she further away. That night, I sat in my studio, staring at a photo of Claire at Forest Park. Her smile in the picture made my heart ache. I didn't want to lose her, but I couldn't let my heart ache. I didn't want to lose her, but I couldn't let Margaret keep playing this game. The signs I'd ignored were now clear. How Margaret would make me uncomfortable. How Margaret deliberately made me uncomfortable. How Richard looked at me like I was a mistake. The wine wasn't the start. It was the culmination of a long-term plan. I held Jason's report, rereading every line. Benzodiazepines. A calculated scheme. I didn't know what Margaret wanted, but I'd find out. Not out of anger, but for Claire, for Ava, for Ethan, and for myself. I wouldn't let the Thorntons keep treating me like a passerby. I opened my computer, starting to dig for more information on Margaret, prescriptions, rumors, anything that could shed light on her scheme. I knew this journey wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. The weeks after meeting Stephen, I lived in a half-awake state. Claire grew more distant, spending more time with her mom. Margaret called constantly, her voice sweet as honey, inviting Claire to the West Hills mansion for mother-daughter talks. I saw Claire come back with red eyes, but when I asked, she just shook her head and said, "Mom's just worried about me." I wanted to tell her about Stephen, about Margaret's prescriptions, but every time I started, her tired eyes stopped me. I was afraid if I pushed too hard, I'd lose her. But I also knew if I didn't act, Margaret and Richard would win. I threw myself into work to escape the stress. My studio in the Pearl District became my refuge, its landscape photos on the walls, a reminder of a simpler world. But even there, I couldn't escape the Thorntons. One afternoon, I got an email from an important client, canceling a photography contract for a major magazine. They didn't explain, just said they'd found someone more suitable. I suspected Richard was behind it. He had enough connections to pressure anyone in Portland. Anger flared in me, but I suppressed it. I needed to focus on evidence, not emotions. Then one morning, a small package appeared at my studio door. No sender's address, just my name handwritten on the envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "You need to see this. Emily." Emily Thornton, Nathan's wife, Claire's brother. I'd never been close to her. She was usually quiet at family gatherings, as if trying to avoid trouble. But this note showed she knew something. I plugged the USB into my computer, my heart pounding. Video files appeared, time-stamped from the night of Margaret's birthday. The first file was footage from the Thornton kitchen, clearly from a security camera. Margaret stood at the counter, furtively pouring liquid from a small vial into my wine glass, her eyes darting like she feared being caught. When I walked in, she quickly hid the vial, flashing a fake smile. I watched the clip over and over, feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was proof. The second file was even more chilling. After we left the party, Margaret and Richard argued in the living room. "Why did you drink that glass?" Margaret shouted, her voice trembling. "It was meant for Daniel, not you." Richard snapped back, angry. "This isn't the first time you've done something stupid like this, Maggie. If that guy knows, we're in trouble." I froze. Not just Margaret. Richard was complicit. They knew the wine was drugged, and they wanted me to take the fall. The third file was from 2 days after the party, filmed in the Thornton living room. Margaret and Richard sat on the sofa, discussing their plan like it was a board meeting. "He knows what I did," Richard said coldly. "So what?" Margaret replied, her lips tight. "It's his word against ours, and we're family. Claire will never choose him over us. If she does, she's not my daughter." She paused, then continued. "I've talked to Claire. I told her Daniel's unreliable, that he neglects the family for that studio. When I'm done, she'll come up with the idea to divorce him herself." I shut off the computer, my hands shaking. This wasn't just about the wine. Margaret and Richard were executing a long-term plan to drive a wedge between me and Claire, to control her life, just as they'd done with Stephen. They didn't just want to humiliate me. They wanted to erase me from their family. And what chilled me most was that they'd done this before, not just to Stephen, but likely to anyone who dared challenge their control. I called Emily right away. She answered in a soft voice, as if afraid of being overheard. "Why did you send this to me?" I asked. "Because they did the same to me," she replied, her voice bitter. "When I first married Nathan, they tried to break us up. They said I wasn't good enough, that I was after the Thornton money. They spread rumors I was cheating, making Nathan doubt me for 2 years. I almost gave up. I can't stand by and watch them do it to you and Claire." "Why not tell Nathan?" I asked. "I tried," she sighed. "But he worships his dad. He thinks I'm paranoid. I sent the USB, because I don't want Claire to get hurt like I did." I thanked Emily, promising to keep it secret. But as I hung up, I knew I couldn't stay silent forever. I needed Claire to see the truth, but she wasn't ready. If I showed her the videos now, she might think I was trying to tear her family apart. I needed more time, more evidence, to ensure she couldn't deny it. I went back to the studio, compiling everything I had. Jason's report, Stephen's emails, and Emily's videos. I saved them to a backup hard drive, locking it in a safe. Every night I rewatched the videos, searching for more clues. The more I watched, the clearer Margaret's facade became. Her perfect smile, her honeyed voice, all a mask for a woman obsessed with control. Richard wasn't innocent either. He knew everything, and let it happen. Meanwhile, Margaret kept pulling Claire in. She gave her a lavish gift, a trust fund for Ava and Ethan, with a hint that she should rethink our marriage. Claire brought the gift home, her eyes bright as she talked about the kids' future. But I saw her gaze waver. I knew Margaret was planting seeds of doubt, and I couldn't let her succeed. I sat in my studio, staring at a photo of Claire and the kids. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for our family. I wouldn't let Margaret and Richard take away what mattered most. I opened my computer, planning the next step. I needed to confront Margaret, but it had to be at the right time, in the right way. The days after getting the USB from Emily, I lived on high alert. Every call from Margaret to Claire, every gift she sent for Ava and Ethan, felt like moves in a chess game. I couldn't afford to lose. Claire remained distant, sometimes looking at me with suspicion, as if her mother's whispers had taken root in her mind. I knew I had to act, but I needed the perfect moment. The security videos, Jason's report, and Stephen's emails were my weapons. But if I used them too soon, Claire might turn away from me, defending her parents as she'd done before. The opportunity came unexpectedly when Claire mentioned that Margaret wanted me to take photos for her publicity portfolio at the Lake Oswego Country Club. Mom specifically asked for you, Claire said, her voice surprised. I think she wants to make peace. I nodded, but I didn't trust Margaret's intentions. This was my chance to face her, not for reconciliation, but to force her to admit the truth. That morning, I arrived at the country club, carrying my camera bag in an envelope with the lab report and Margaret's prescription list. The club sat by the lake, with lush green lawns and a grand building like a small palace. Margaret was waiting in the banquet room, dressed in a deep green silk dress, her makeup flawless, her diamond earrings glinting as always. Richard was absent. She said he was tied up with a company meeting. I knew this was my chance to talk straight. Daniel, thank you for coming, Margaret said, her voice sweet as honey. I want stunning photos for my charity board. You're a talented photographer, even if Richard doesn't admit it. I set my camera bag down, looking her straight in the eye. Before we start, I think you should see this. I handed her the envelope, my voice calm but firm. Margaret frowned, opening the envelope reluctantly. As she read the lab report, her hand trembled slightly. This is absurd, she whispered, her confidence fading. I don't know what you're talking about. You know exactly what I mean. I cut her off. I know you put benzodiazepines in my wine glass on your birthday. I saw you do it, and I have security footage to prove it. You wanted me to look unreliable, didn't you? Her face went pale, but she quickly regained her composure. You're imagining a conspiracy, Daniel. I would never do that. Claire won't believe you. I don't need Claire to believe me right now, I said, my voice cold. I have the lab report, the videos, and the list of prescriptions from 3 of your doctors. I want you to tell Richard the truth, and both of you need to stop treating me like a passerby in Claire's life. If not, I'll show Claire everything. And not just Claire, but this country club, your friends, Richard's business partners. Margaret laughed, but the sound was hollow. You think Claire will choose you over me? She's my daughter, Daniel. She'll always come back to her family. Maybe, I replied, not breaking eye contact. But she'll believe the lab report. She'll believe the videos, and she'll believe the people you've hurt. Like Stephen Carter. Are you willing to bet Claire's affection on that? She fell silent, her hands gripping the envelope tightly. Then, as if she couldn't hold back, she burst out. It wasn't to harm you, just to make you sick for a bit. To miss that photo exhibition. To show Claire you're not dependable. She stopped, realizing she'd said too much. You're not worthy of my daughter, Daniel. You never were. I let her words hang in the air, then said, here's what's going to happen. You'll tell Richard what you did. Then both of you will start respecting me. Not because you like me, but because if you don't, Claire will see who you really are. I picked up my camera bag and turned to leave. I'm not taking photos today. As I stepped out of the club, the sunlight by the lake blinded me. But inside, I felt a sense of relief. Margaret had admitted it, even if only partially, and I'd made her afraid. But I knew the fight wasn't over. Margaret wouldn't easily give up control. And Richard, well, I needed to prepare for a bigger confrontation with the entire Thornton family. Back at my studio in the Pearl District, I checked my evidence, the security videos, Jason's report, Stephen's emails, the prescription list. I saved them to a backup hard drive, locked in a safe. I knew I needed Claire and Nathan to see the truth, but I had to be careful. If I handled it wrong, Claire might turn away from me. I needed a plan to confront the entire Thornton family, where Margaret and Richard couldn't deny anything. Sitting in the studio, I looked at a photo of Claire and the kids at Forest Park. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for our family. I wouldn't let Margaret and Richard take away what mattered most to me. I began planning a family meeting where the truth would be laid bare. After the confrontation with Margaret at the Lake Oswego Country Club, I knew she wouldn't back down easily. Her fake smile and honeyed voice were just a facade for her stubbornness. But I also saw the panic in her eyes when I presented the evidence envelope, and that gave me hope. I needed a bigger confrontation, one where Claire, Nathan, and Emily were all present. So Margaret and Richard couldn't deny anything. I needed Claire to see the truth, not through my words, but through her parents' actions. I planned in my studio in the Pearl District, where dim lights illuminated my landscape photos. I checked everything: Jason's report on the benzodiazepines, Stephen Carter's emails, Margaret's prescription list, and most crucially, Emily's security videos. I copied them onto a USB drive, prepared a small projector, and stored a backup in the safe. I knew Margaret and Richard would try to dismiss it, but I was ready. This wasn't just a fight for me, it was for Claire, Ava, Ethan, and our family's future. I suggested a family meeting at the Thornton mansion in West Hills. Claire agreed, though she was still cold toward me. "I don't know what you're planning, Daniel," she said, her voice weary, "but don't hurt my parents." I just nodded, making no promises. Nathan and Emily were invited too, and I sensed tension in Emily's voice when she confirmed she'd come. She knew what was coming, and I knew she was on my side. That night, we entered the Thornton living room, where the crystal chandelier lit up pristine white walls. Margaret and Richard sat on the sofa, looking like a powerful couple in a perfect portrait. Margaret wore a cashmere sweater, her diamond earrings glinting, her smile sweet, but her eyes sharp. Richard, in a gray suit, sipped bourbon, eyeing me with familiar disdain. Claire sat beside me, her hands clasped tightly, her gaze flickering between me and her parents. Nathan and Emily sat across, Nathan stiff as if awaiting a corporate meeting, Emily avoiding everyone's eyes. "We're here to clear some things up," I began, my voice calm but resolute. "I'd like to record this conversation, to keep it for the family." I set the projector on the table, connecting it to my laptop. Margaret immediately objected. "This is a private family matter," she said, her voice shrill. "No need for machines, Daniel." "Exactly," I replied, unyielding. "A family matter, and I'm part of this family, even if you and Dad have tried to make me feel otherwise." I started the projector, and the first security video played. Margaret in the kitchen, secretly pouring liquid from a small vial into my wine glass, her eyes darting nervously. The room's whispers fell silent. Claire gripped my hand tighter, her breathing quick. I played the next video, from after the party, where Margaret yelled at Richard. "That glass was for Daniel, not you," Richard retorted. "This isn't the first time you've pulled something stupid like this, Maggie." Margaret's face went pale, and Richard clutched his bourbon glass, avoiding eye contact. "That's not true." Margaret jumped up, her voice trembling. "That video's been edited. Daniel's trying to tear us apart, Claire." I didn't respond, just played the third video, where Margaret and Richard discussed their plan to split me and Claire. "When I'm done, she'll come up with the idea to divorce him herself," Margaret said coldly. Claire let go of my hand, covering her mouth, her eyes welling up. Nathan shook his head, whispering, "No way." I continued, placing Jason's lab report on the table. "This is the analysis of the wine glass. Benzodiazepines. Enough to make me disoriented, lose credibility. I also have your prescription list from 3 doctors, and emails from Stephen Carter, who you and Dad drove out of Claire's life with lies." Richard stood, his voice furious. "You're the manipulator, Daniel. You're jealous of our family, so you cooked up this scheme." "Then why don't you explain the videos?" I asked, my voice icy. "Why not explain the vial? Or do you both think Claire and Nathan will believe your lies over the evidence?" Claire sobbed, standing to face her parents. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why did you do this to Daniel? To me? You did this to Stephen, and now my husband." Margaret reached for her. "Claire, sweetheart, he's manipulating you. I only wanted to protect you." "Protect?" Claire shouted. "You tried to poison my husband. You wanted to ruin my marriage. That's not protection. It's control." She turned to me, tears streaming. "Daniel, why didn't you tell me sooner? I needed you to see the truth," I said, my voice softening. "Not just what they did to me, but what they've done to you your whole life." Nathan, silent until now, stood, his eyes angry. "This can't be real," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Emily touched his arm, her voice soft. "They did it to me, Nathan. They said I wasn't good enough for you. Spread rumors I was cheating. I tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen." Nathan looked at Emily, then at his parents, as if seeing them for the first time. He shook his head, sat down, his face pale. Margaret started crying, but I saw no remorse in her eyes, just defeat. Richard stayed silent, his gaze hard, but I noticed his shoulders trembling slightly. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket, placing it in front of Richard. "This has everything. Videos, reports, emails. I have copies. If you and Mom keep interfering in our marriage, I'll send these to every member of the country club, your business partners, Mom's friends. I don't want to hurt Claire, but I'll protect my family." I packed up the projector, taking Claire's hand. As we left, I felt Margaret and Richard's eyes on my back. They knew they'd lost, but I knew this fight wasn't truly over. After the confrontation at the Thornton mansion, the atmosphere in our home shifted. Claire was no longer distant, but she carried a deep sadness, as if she'd lost a part of herself. She sat for hours in the living room, staring out the window, trying to understand why her parents did what they did. I wanted to hold her, tell her everything would be okay, but I knew she needed time. Eva and Ethan, sensing the tension, kept asking, "What's wrong with Mom, Dad?" I could only hug them, promising we were still a family, no matter how complicated things got. Margaret didn't give up right away. The next morning, she called Claire, sobbing, saying I'd been rude and threatened the family. Claire listened, but this time she didn't waver. "Mom, I saw the videos," she said firmly over the speakerphone. "You tried to poison Daniel. I don't want to hear excuses. If you want to stay in my life, you have to respect him." She hung up, looking at me with red eyes. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she whispered. "I didn't believe you." "It's okay," I said, holding her hand. "What matters is you know the truth now." But inside, I knew this wound would take time to heal. We started family therapy, not just to deal with the trauma from Margaret and Richard's actions, but to rebuild trust between me and Claire. In those sessions, Claire admitted she always felt pressure to please her parents, even when they hurt her. "I thought if I did what they wanted, they'd be happy," she said, her voice trembling. "But they were never satisfied." I listened, holding her hand, feeling our love stronger than ever. Therapy also helped Ava and Ethan understand that their grandparents still loved them, but needed to change how they acted. Meanwhile, I focused on work to keep my mind clear. I was preparing for a major photo exhibition at a gallery in the Pearl District, where I'd showcase works about freedom and family, photos of Forest Park, the Willamette River, and everyday moments with Claire and the kids. The exhibition was a chance to prove myself, not just to the world, but to myself. I turned down a job offer from Richard, sent through one of his company staff, proposing I work as an image consultant with a generous salary. "Thanks, but I'm good," I said calmly. I didn't want any strings tying me to the Thornton family. Margaret and Richard stayed silent for a few weeks, but then one morning, a letter arrived at our home from Richard's lawyer's office. Inside were documents transferring ownership of the house we were renting in suburban Portland, along with a trust fund for Ava and Ethan. No note, no conditions, no apology, just a quiet act, as if they were admitting defeat. Claire looked at the papers, her eyes a mix of surprise and suspicion. "Are they trying to make amends?" she asked. "No," I replied. "They know they can't control us anymore. This is their way of acknowledging it. We decided to keep the house, but the trust fund would be saved for the kids' future, not letting Margaret and Richard use it as leverage." Nathan and Emily started to change too. Nathan, after the confrontation, called to apologize. "I can't believe Mom and Dad did that," he said, his voice low. Emily tried to tell me, but I didn't listen. He and Emily began their own therapy, working to mend the cracks Margaret and Richard had caused in their marriage. Nathan even visited my studio once, admiring the photos and saying, "You're really good, Daniel. My dad was wrong to look down on you." It was the first time I saw him as a brother, not someone siding with his parents. My exhibition took place on a fall evening, with the Pearl District lights glowing brightly. Friends, colleagues, and even Stephen Carter came to congratulate me. Claire stood by my side, wearing her favorite green dress, her smile radiant like the day we met. Ava and Ethan ran around, pointing at the photos, proudly telling everyone, "My dad took these." As I stood before the crowd, introducing the collection, I felt a new strength, not because I'd defeated Margaret and Richard, but because I'd protected my family. That night, back home, Claire sat beside me on the sofa, her head resting on my shoulder. I used to think success was making my parents happy, she said softly. But now I know it's living true to what I believe, with the people I love. She squeezed my hand, and I knew we'd weathered the storm. Margaret and Richard stopped calling, but I knew they were watching from afar. They sent gifts for Ava and Ethan's birthdays, but without the hints or demands of before. They'd learned Claire was no longer a pawn in their game. I looked at my family, Claire, Ava, Ethan, and knew I'd done right. I didn't need the Thorntons' approval. I just needed their love. 6 months passed since the confrontation at the Thornton mansion, and our lives found their rhythm again. Claire and I welcomed our third child, a girl we named Lily, after my grandmother, who always taught me that family is where you return, no matter the hardship. When Lily was born, Claire held my hand in the hospital, her eyes shining like the day we met in the Pearl District. "We did it, Daniel," she whispered. "We got through it all." I kissed her forehead, feeling the strength of our love, now even more resilient after the storm. Margaret and Richard visited Lily in the hospital, bringing a handcrafted wooden crib and an expensive toy set. They kept their distance, offering polite smiles, not trying to give advice or impose as they once did. Margaret leaned down to look at Lily, her gaze gentle but still slightly awkward. Richard shook my hand, saying, "Congratulations, Daniel," his voice stiff but lacking its old disdain. They didn't apologize. I didn't expect them to, but their quiet presence was an admission they could no longer control us. As they left, Claire held my hand, saying, "They'll never change, will they?" I shook my head. "No, but they have to accept us." We moved into the house Richard had deeded to us, in suburban Portland, with a wide yard and a view of green hills. The house was a symbol of a fresh start, where Ava and Ethan played freely, and Lily grew up surrounded by laughter. But I didn't let the gift blur the truth. I knew Margaret and Richard didn't act out of kindness. They did it to retain some influence, even from a distance. We set clear boundaries. They could see the grandkids, but only with our approval, and no hints about how we should live. I opened my own gallery in the Pearl District, a dream I'd long held. The gallery showcased works about family and freedom, photos of Claire and the kids at Forest Park, misty forests, shimmering rivers. At the opening, friends, colleagues, and even my parents from Seattle came to celebrate. Claire stood by my side, holding Lily, with Ava and Ethan running around, showing off the photos to guests. As I looked at the crowded room, I realized I'd achieved what Margaret and Richard never understood. Success isn't money or power, but living true to your values. One afternoon, I received a package from Richard. Inside was a photo book for his company's annual report, using my landscape images. A handwritten note came with it. "Hired the best photographer I know. Thought you'd want a copy." No apology, no thanks, but it was Richard's way of acknowledging my talent, something he'd never done before. I didn't call back, and he didn't expect me to. We understood each other in our own way. He knew I didn't need his approval, and I knew he'd learned his lesson. One summer evening, I took Ava and Ethan to Forest Park, teaching them to shoot with my old camera. The sunset glowed through the trees, painting the ground golden. Ava tried to capture a squirrel, while Ethan laughed, blurring his shot. Claire sat on a bench, holding Lily, watching us with a gentle smile. As stars began to twinkle in the sky, I sat beside her, feeling the peace I'd fought to keep. Sitting there, I realized something I'd never put into words. I didn't win by defeating Margaret and Richard, or playing their manipulative games. I won by refusing to play. I stood my ground, protected my family, and built a life on my own definition of success, not through schemes, but through honesty and perseverance. That was the sweetest revenge. Living well, true to myself, with the people I love. Daniel Harper's story offers a profound lesson about protecting personal values and setting boundaries in complex family relationships, an issue many Americans face today. When Margaret and Richard tried to manipulate Claire with gifts like the trust fund and lies, Daniel didn't respond with anger or vengeance, but with persistence and concrete evidence, from the lab report to security videos. This teaches us that in real life, when facing control or prejudice from family, like pressure to choose a stable career over a creative one like Daniel's, gathering information and standing firm is key. Daniel's act of organizing the family confrontation, presenting the truth to Claire and Nathan, underscores the importance of honest communication in resolving conflict. The advice is engage in open dialogue, using facts over emotions to persuade,
especially in American culture, where individuals are encouraged to stand up for themselves. Daniel and Claire's boundary setting with Margaret and Richard, allowing grandparent visits only under supervision, is a lesson in establishing healthy limits, protecting the immediate family without fully severing ties. Finally, Daniel's opening of the Pearl District Gallery, and living true to his photography passion, reminds us that true success in America isn't about pleasing others, but pursuing your own path, as Daniel did, despite the Thorntons' prejudice. Stay resolute, honest, and prioritize family, but don't let external expectations control you. Subscribe to the channel to follow Daniel Harper's journey of protecting his family and uncovering the truth. And thank you for joining us in this emotional story. See you in the next video, where we continue to explore profound life lessons.